One thing I wanted to do a little bit was uh, talk a little bit about intertextuality. It's a long word. It just basically means cross-references. Uh, the Revelation is highly intertextual, meaning that uh, it refers constantly to the Old Testament. And one of the things I've only kind of done that a little bit. I've only given you a few tidbits, not really gone into all the details. And as Dan mentioned some time ago, well, Dan and I were talking. He pointed out that Revelation is basically, to all intents and purposes, based on, or well, that's not the right way to put it. Daniel, the book of Daniel, is a really helpful background for Revelation. The problem is you can't always figure out how they relate. But a lot of the images in Revelation, you'll find them in Daniel, okay? So Daniel is your go-to book for the images in Revelation. But not all of them are there. And I wanted to just mention, we talked last time about the woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. I wonder if anyone who knows their Bible would be able to recognize the source of this image, where this would have come from. No. Okay. Do you guys remember Joseph's dream of the sun and the moon and the 12 stars, or 11 stars, bowing down before him? Remember that? Okay. Well, so basically, sun and moon, so this is a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, so that this is and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Very clear, image of Israel, okay? That's why we can say with pretty good certainty that this is talking about Israel. And of course, like I mentioned before, the specifics of it, Mary is the pregnant woman who is giving birth. But this is an image which incorporates the concrete idea of giving birth to the Messiah. Okay, she gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Anybody remember? Hi, Darson. Anybody remember where that image comes from? One who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Psalm 2. Psalm 2. And Psalm 2 is one of the major references, at least in Psalms, to the Messiah. Okay. Hi there. I would highly recommend that you kind of have, well, I mean, it's kind of up to you, but if you are interested in sort of tracking down some of the theme of the Messiah through the Old Testament, Psalm 2 is definitely one you want to take cognizance of, okay? And the way we went over Psalm 2 earlier, and I just love the way that psalm works, the four different voices, and the picture you get of the sort of panorama of the human condition, with rulers and elites and so on, all trying to push God out of the picture, God laughing at them, and then saying, I've set up my Messiah, and it's all over as far as I'm concerned. And then, of course, the Messiah saying, this is what God told me. And then he says, He's going to give me the ends of the earth, and I'm going to rule the nations with a rod of iron and smash them like pottery, And so then the poetic voice says, so be warned, kings, correct yourselves, rulers of the earth, and so on. And so you better figure this stuff out, because it's not going to be fun if you don't. And then, of course, he ends with, blessed are all who take refuge in him, which I really like that way of ending, because there is sort of some violent imagery in there, but the place where the psalm lands, which gives us hope for what the reign of the Messiah will be like, is blessed are those who take refuge in him. And that's the same thing we saw with the opening of the sixth seal, where the people are running around like crazy trying to get away from all the catastrophes, the earthquakes and so on. And then they're saying, who can stand before the wrath of the one seated on the throne and the wrath of the Lamb? And then you have that picture of an uncountable number standing before the throne and before the Lamb, saying salvation belongs to the Lamb and to the one seated on the throne. And so, that kind of reflects the idea in Psalm 2 that blessed are all who take refuge in him. Figure it out, people. Figure it out, world, So anyway, and again, the book of Daniel is an important basic source of the images, but there are many other places where you'll find images, such as Ezekiel, Isaiah, and so on and so forth. So understanding the book of Revelation, understanding the book of Revelation does not require you to be completely, you don't have to have memorized the Old Testament, or even Daniel for that matter. The more familiar you are with those books like Daniel and Isaiah and so on and so forth, the easier you'll start to recognize these images, and it'll sort of pop up in your thinking as you're reading the book of Revelation. You'll say, oh yeah, that was in Daniel. Oh wait, that one was in Ezekiel or whatever. So, but you can still understand the book without that. In other words, I don't want you to feel discouraged like you need to be a Bible scholar and have it all at your fingertips to understand Revelation. You don't. You don't need to be. You just listen to me and I'll tell you what it all means. But seriously though, my hope here is that I can give you kind of an entree or a roadmap of Revelation. And then as you go through and learn more about the Bible and read more of the Old Testament and so on, you'll start to recognize all the features that come out in Revelation. All right. Yes. So I was going to say more about that, but I don't think I will. I think I'm just going to forge ahead. All right. So, we start off. Can I get someone to read this part 12, 13 through 18? You want to read it for me? Can you? Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Thanks.
When the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time, and times and half a time. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, to sweep her away with the flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from its mouth.
Thanks. Okay, so what we have here is again we have some images, and look at the 2 wings of the great eagle. Okay, now this is an image that that did occur in the Old Testament. It was the image that was used to describe how God brought Israel out of Egypt. So he brought them out on wings of an eagle from Egypt. Okay, so here he's bringing the woman Israel out of danger, the danger from the dragon with the two wings of the eagle. Okay, now instead of going to some place, right, like another country or something, she goes into the wilderness. And there is this notion of wilderness experience, okay? A wilderness have you guys heard this phrase, wilderness experience? Some of you might have heard that phrase. And this is something I think maybe ought to be taught more, because when Christians go through it, they don't know what they're up against. But one of the things you notice is that almost everyone in the Bible who goes, who God uses and calls, goes through some kind of wilderness experience. Okay, let's take Jesus himself. All right, so Jesus gets baptized, right? And then a dove descends on him, and a voice from heaven says, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." And then what happens? Anybody remember? The Spirit throws him, literally, the Greek word is throws him into, it's balo, throws him into the wilderness. Why? So he can be tempted by the devil. Wait a minute. I mean, is this what God does to the people he likes? The people he's well pleased with? He throws them into the desert and lets them get tempted by the devil? Well, apparently. I mean, so what happened to, you remember Abraham, okay? Abraham was told, leave your country, leave your place, leave your people, leave it all behind, and go where I tell you. And so he goes wandering around in essentially a wilderness where he, from his point of view, he has to be careful because there's no one, now that he's left home and left his relatives and everything, there's no one to avenge him if somebody kills him. Hey, no one's going to come after you. No avenger of blood. And so that's why he lies about Sarah being his sister instead of his wife, because if someone wants her and takes her, he would kill Abraham and then take Sarah. But instead, that doesn't happen. But the result of it is that God has to keep stepping in and pulling Abraham's fat out of the fire, or I don't know, is that a good image? I don't know. But anyway, has to basically rescue Abraham and restore Sarah back to him. And we have Elijah. After this great victory over the prophets of Baal, when Elijah calls down fire from heaven, he hears that Jezebel is after him and has sworn to kill him, and so he goes sprinting off into the wilderness. Just runs. I guess he ran maybe 3 or 4 marathons, and by the time he got wherever he got, he was tired. So anyway, so what we find is this repeatedly. We have this. Well, we'll take David, right? King David spent a lot of time in the wilderness, hiding from Saul, right? And, so here's what happens, right? King David gets anointed by Samuel. Gets anointed by Samuel on the sly. So there's a drive-by anointing, and then there's an on-the-sly anointing. But the on-the-sly one comes first. So David is, under the table, anointed under the table, so nobody knows about it. Well, then he just goes right on out and kills Goliath, right? Well, you think, okay, now's the time. David is going to be. Well, then Saul goes crazy and tries to pin him to the wall with a spear. And then he finds out that Saul doesn't like him. And, Jonathan comes out and says, Jonathan is Saul's son. He comes out and says, there must be some misunderstanding. And David says, no, there's no misunderstanding. We understand each other perfectly. Your dad wants to kill me, and I don't want to be killed. A fundamental difference of opinion here. It's no misunderstanding, So, anyway, so he goes and spends time in the wilderness, even feigns madness at one point, right? So why am I going on and on about this? What is it about the wilderness? What is it about the wilderness? Well, the wilderness is where you go to die. There is nothing. You go into the wilderness and there are no resources. The Israelites wandered around in the wilderness for 40 years, and they were constantly saying, we don't have any food, we don't have any water, we're just sick of this manna. Well, where did they get the manna from? Well, it didn't grow on trees. Well, did it? Anyway, the manna was bread from heaven. It came down from God. And the thing about it is, that was the only way they could survive, was if God provided for them. This is the characteristic of the wilderness experience. All human resources, all human, what's the word I'm looking for? Everything we would ordinarily turn to for whatever we need, to fulfill our needs, none of those things are available. And we suffer, okay? The only way we can get out of that is to depend on God. And it's hard to depend on God because, after all, you look around and you say, God, where are you anyway? The problem with God is that, the problem with our God, which is in contrast to many other gods, is you can't see him. So it's really hard to be sure that he's there, right? And anyway, in the wilderness, you have to trust that he's there and he's going to take care of you, okay? When I first became a Christian, in November of 71, I think. I'm pretty sure it was November of 71. If I say November of 71, all the dates kind of fall into place. So it's November of 71, I think. Anyway, yes. Does that work? Anyway, I'm not going to do the calendar thing. I'm really bad with calendars, okay? So I always miss dates and things like that. Most of the time anyway, sorry. Okay, I became a Christian in November of 71. Suddenly I had a lot of friends. I was kind of a nerdy loner type and had just a few friends. And then all of a sudden, all these Christians were saying hi to me in the halls, and people were talking to me all the time. And I'm thinking, this is high school, right? And I think, wow, this is so cool, I feel like I'm almost like I'm popular or something, And so God said, oh, we can't have that. And so my family moved from San Francisco to Redwood City in the middle of my senior year. Oh, fun, right? So I really loved San Francisco because I knew the place like the back of my hand. I could get anywhere, I knew all the bus routes. We didn't have a car, but I didn't need a car. I could get anywhere I needed to go, and it was easy. Well, down in Redwood City, people in Redwood City didn't have legs. You never saw them anyway. You saw from there up. Everybody drove everywhere, right? I would walk from my house to the library. It was maybe a mile each way. And I would be the only person on the street that I saw, And I would think, wow, I would take these long walks and I wouldn't see anybody. except people in cars, right? And there weren't any Christians in Redwood City. That's something I also came to realize. Or, well, that wasn't true, of course, but I went in my high school, Sequoia High School. I tried to start a Christian club, but nobody wanted to do it. There was a Christian teacher there, but he didn't want to do it. And anyway, so nothing seemed to happen. Whereas I had become a Christian in San Francisco at Lowell High School through the Christian club on the school at Lowell, And so I felt like, wow, what's going on here? Nobody cares, I went to this church where it was interesting too. In the church I went to, I tried to start a youth group. They didn't have a youth group, so I tried to start a youth group. We had one meeting, and then the guy who they had put in charge of it canceled it. And I have no clue. We didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't anything weird. He just canceled it. And I thought, wow, this is a lot of fun, So anyway, eventually I did find fellowship, and I did, it was a good place. But for about the first year or so, it was terrible. It was like, wow, incredibly lonely. Why am I saying all this? Well, what happened was after about 6 or 8 months of this, it was weird. Within about a 2-week period, almost, anyway, it was very close. 2 people, one in because I would still go up to San Francisco. So one person in San Francisco and one person in Redwood City said almost the identical words to me. They said, "Fred, you've become a much nicer person." And I thought, well, now that's kind of a good or bad, right? What was I like before? But the good thing was that I'd become a nicer person, and I suddenly realized that was what this whole wilderness experience was all about, right? All this pain and loneliness and so on and so forth was actually doing something to me. And I wouldn't have chosen it, but it was working. And so this is what wilderness experiences are for. God gets you where he wants you, and he can really work on you, and you really can't do anything about it. You may squirm, you may cry, you may, say, "Help, get me out of this," but God's got you where he wants you, and he's going to work on you until he's done with you, or at least done with you temporarily, Now, obviously, the cool thing about it is God sustains you. You see how God becomes real to you during these times, because God answered so many of my prayers during these times in weird and strange ways, So I can't say that God was not there. He very definitely was there. And that's what's cool about the wilderness experience, is that God is there. All right? So, here we are. The Israel is taken out into the wilderness, all right? And she is to be nourished. Notice nourished for a time and times and half a time. Now, this is an unspecified time. It's a limited time. It's not going to go on forever, okay? And this times and half a time, that's basically 3.5. Some people relate it to the 7-year tribulation. So this is during the 3.5 years of the tribulation, Israel will be out in the wilderness, protected by God, and so on and so forth. I don't know. To me, I guess I haven't sorted all of this out. So yeah, I can tell you a lot, but I can't tell you everything. There's still more to find out, okay? What is this time and times and half a time? And a lot of people have theories about it. And like I said, many people see it as the 7-year tribulation period. But I'm not sure that that's what it is, because it doesn't seem to. It seems like I sort of see this as the history of Israel after Christ was born. All right. On the other hand, some people have argued that after Christ was born, there was this gap between Christ born and Christ returning, or Christ going up to heaven and Christ returning, which they call the church age, and that this is after that. I don't know. I haven't sorted this out yet. But it seems to me that this is the history of Israel. Israel has been in the wilderness, or was in the wilderness for a long time, right? It was scattered among the nations. Well, that's a perfect hiding place if you think about it. Where is Israel? I don't know. They're just scattered among the nations. I don't know where they are. I can't find them. They're all over the place, or they're nowhere. They're everywhere or nowhere, right? And so then, of course, when the devil finally gets a grip on a significant number of them, namely in Europe, kills 6 million of them or so. Well, then what happens? God brings about the restoration of the nation of Israel. This is my take on it. Some people might argue with the politics and, the whole Gaza, Palestine thing. I'm not going to go into that. I honestly think, I think Israel may have, well, all right, what do I really think? What I really think is you shouldn't kill a whole bunch of innocent people. That's a terrorist act, and if a country decides that, like Israel decides that they want to put a stop to it, more power to them. Overreacting, on the other hand, I don't know. I mean, have they overreacted? I don't know. And there's and from what I know historically, most everything that the opponents of Israel say, they're certainly not afraid of lying. They have lied from the very 1949 on, okay, and blamed Israel for things that they did. This is my personal view of it. I see Israel. I'm not saying that everything Israel has done is right, but I feel that they have been far more sinned against than sinned. Okay, if you know what I'm saying. And I think this is a case where they are not the guilty party here. Okay, that's my take on it. Whether you agree with me is up to you. But try to find out what's going on. Try to find out all right, so for example, Gaza. What happened with Gaza? Israel gave it back to the Gazans. What happened then? Israel gave them self-rule and so on and so forth. What happened then? There's all kinds of things you can find out about this whole thing. The Gazans, the Palestinians, all of this stuff. In my view, they won't take yes for an answer. Israel has tried to give them what they wanted, and they've consistently said, no, we don't want you to be around. That there's the saying, from the river to the sea. Anybody heard that saying, from the river to the sea? Well, what that means is no Israel. Basically, we're going to have from the river, the Euphrates, to the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, all ours. And there's maybe you're right. Anyway, it's from river to sea, so you're probably right on that, actually. So anyway, but because I was thinking in terms of yeah. So, but the idea is no Israel, okay? And it's kind of hard to negotiate with people when the first premise that they have is that you don't have a right to exist. Okay, let's negotiate on that. You don't have a right to exist, but we'll negotiate. Well, maybe we'll kill only half of you. I don't know. So anyway, I'm not sympathetic at all. But God knows. This is the other thing. God knows. It's God's job to take care of Israel, okay? And what I don't see in Israel is trust in God. This is something I think, the whole thing, they are still Jews, meaning they are still essentially descendants of the Pharisees, okay? The Pharisees the Jewish religion is the religion of the Pharisees projected into history, okay? And there's a very strong opposition to Christ. And of course, they have some justification because Christians have mistreated them throughout history. Christians have not taken Romans 11 seriously. We're the wild olive branches that were grafted into the tree. Israel was the natural olive branches. And so we're boasting against the natural olive branches and saying how much better we are than them, which is kind of nonsense. We all get our sustenance, our life from the same tree. Okay, enough about Israel. But if you have any questions about that, I will answer them to the best of my ability. Because I do have a fairly strong, I tend to, let me put it this way. Most of my opinions, even if they're opinions, are not in a vacuum. I've at least tried to find out some of what's going on. And so my opinions on Israel are based on at least somewhat of a survey of history, okay? All right, so here we go. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. Now, what you have here is, so we're going to find water. Later on, we'll see water as a symbol of chaotic, of the part of the world that's in chaos. Sort of the barbarians, the people who are uncivilized. There is just a kind of a they're not really what you might call moral. All right, at least not in I would say uncivilized is probably the best. They have kind of rejected the norms of civilization. This is my view of it. So they're trying to wipe Israel away, the woman away, with the uncivilized peoples of the world, and I would count the Nazis as uncivilized. They rejected, oddly enough, Germany was the best educated, highest in arts, highest in industry of any country in the world. It was fascinating, even more than the United States, because the United States was an economic powerhouse. But let me just say that in terms of art and literature and so on, you had to look mighty hard to find anything on this side of the Atlantic, But and yet Germany fell prey to a barbaric pagan philosophy, Nazism. And of course, part of it was due to the fact that the treaty at the end of World War I was crazy. Okay, it basically guaranteed that there was going to be round two of the war, and of course the war itself, World War I. So I always tell Dan and other people who will listen to me, it was interesting. One time I went to an AI conference, or actually it was a Lisp programming conference, but it was a lot of AI stuff. And they were talking about bots. This is back before the day of the AI stuff we have now. So they had all these different chat bots and things that you could that they put on the web. And so these people who were talking about their experience with a bot, and they were trying to see how long they could keep conversations going. And so they found out that the question they would ask the users that would keep the conversation going the longest was, "What movies have you seen recently?" And the question that was, would tend to cut off the conversation most quickly was, what do you think What do you think the causes of World War I were? Okay. And ironically, though, the World War I had a much bigger impact on all of us, even to this day, you know. And you could say that the stuff going on in Israel is a direct outcome of the stuff that happened in World War I, because at the end of World War I, they had a mandate. The British were given a mandate to create a homeland for the Jews. Okay, they didn't fulfill that mandate until after World War II, but World War I was when the mandate was given, you know. So that's pretty weird if you ask me. Anyway, World War I was a big disaster. It was a judgment on Western civilization, which had been basically drifting away from God at a faster or slower rate, depending on where you were. But so all of the Enlightenment and all the ideas that humanity was advancing, and we're gonna spread light to all over the world. Well, that was pretty well exploded, quite literally, by World War I. And so, the point I was trying to make there is that the Israel, the woman, was chased and was attacked by the water, which is the chaotic and barbaric peoples of the world. But the earth came to help the woman. Now, the earth is the civilized and I don't know what's the right word, moral, or countries of the world, and that's what happened in World War II. That the Americans, the British, the French, and well, the French didn't do that much. The Russians were anyway. They were kind of forced into it, but the flood that would wash Israel away, kill the last of the Jews, was stopped. Actually, there were more Jews than in Europe, but anyway, but a lot of the Jews were in Europe, and there were almost. It was a major decrease in the Jewish population, what happened in World War II. But eventually that got stopped. Okay, that's the way I interpret this. And now you might say, what? This is crazy. Is this really that? I don't know. But this is the way, this is what this suggests to me, is if we want to think about what's been happening to Israel. Israel wandered throughout Europe, throughout parts of Asia, Egypt, all these different places, and for thousands of years, and then finally now they have a homeland. But notice that the earth here swallowed up the river that the dragon poured from his mouth. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? There was an attack on the woman, and the earth swallowed it up. That implies to me that there was an attempt to destroy the woman that was by barbaric peoples and so on, that was stopped by the earth, which is the in my opinion civilized peoples of the earth. Take it or leave it. In other words, this is another part where my view of it may or may not be true, but this is what I think. Okay. Someone want to read this for us? Nick, thank you.
Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus.
Okay, so the dragon said, darn, she got away. Well, okay, now what do I do? So he goes after the rest of her offspring. And who are these other offspring? How are they identified? This is pretty obvious, right? They keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So who are these other offspring that the dragon went off to make war on? Do we have a useful descriptive term that we apply to these people? Well, believers, but more specifically, Christians. Yeah, Christians. These are Christians. How do we know? Because they hold to the testimony of Jesus, you see. So they're distinguished from the woman herself, Israel, because they hold to the testimony of Jesus. They keep the commandments of God, and they hold to the testimony of Jesus, all right? And so we know that Israel is the woman, and she's off in the wilderness running for her life half the time from the dragon spewing water at her and so on and so forth. And then, but he can't catch her, so he gives up and starts chasing down her offspring. Now, he can't catch the main offspring, which is Messiah or Christ. Why? Because he's inaccessible at this point. He's caught up to heaven, okay? Oh, by the way, I wanted to point this out. Where'd it go? Yes. This, let's see here. This, I might have already said this. Anyway, but her child was caught up to God. That word caught up to is the same word as translated rapture. Well, we call it rapture. We'll see this word later when we talk about the reaping of the earth and so on. There's this caught up. This is in 1 Thessalonians 4 or 5, I forget which. But, the idea that we're caught up and meet with the Lord in the air. So this is the same thing that happens to Jesus. He's caught up to the throne of God, okay? And so, anyway, he's inaccessible to the dragon. Dragon ain't going to touch him anymore. And so he can't catch the woman because everything he tries seems to be frustrated one way or another. And so he's going after the Christians because they're the only ones that seem to be anyone that he can get at, okay? At least for that, for this time frame, okay? Whew. Now, why do I have 13:1 to 4? That's weird. Okay, well, anyway. No, there it is. All right. So, what happens now? Okay. Well, like I said before, last time or the time before, okay, the way Satan works is he is a spiritual focus for human effort, okay, or for human beings. And here we're going to see how this works. Can somebody read this passage? This is chapter 13.
Stood
you want to do it, Chris?
I got it.
Oh, okay.
He stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. And the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?"
Okay, so we have a beast. Now, these beasts are human entities, human empires, or human governments, or human, they are, the easiest way to say it is they're empires, okay? And how do I know this? Because in Daniel, the beasts in Daniel were all empires, okay? And the fact that they're bestial means that they're basically evil. They're basically inhuman. And one of the things you notice about a lot of the stuff that goes on in history is the inhumanity of people or man's inhumanity to man. I've said this before, and I'm not going to beat on it again, but we seem to be really good at treating each other as badly as possible, okay? Yeah, you just think about what people will... Have any of you ever looked into, I mean, you know, on a boring Sunday afternoon when you're, you know, as you know, waiting for the long dark tea time of the soul to come along, have you ever thought, oh, I think I'm going to go look into different ways people have tortured people? Have you ever done that? Probably not. But, you know, there are some really amazing things that people will do to people, you know. I mean, I think, personally, you know, if you wrapped me in a wet blanket, I'd probably do anything you asked me to, you know. You know, that's one thing they do, is they get a blanket and make it wet and just wrap someone up in the blanket, or the, not blanket, rug or something, right? And so you're totally, you know, you can't breathe, you know, you're constricted. I mean, I'm somewhat claustrophobic. It took me a considerable amount of thought to be able to get in an MRI machine, you know, and not kind of panic, right? One time I did. I mean, I guess I can't take it, and they took me out. The last time I went, I kind of figured it out. I just closed my eyes and didn't open my eyes. And as long as I had my eyes closed, I didn't feel like I was, you know, I just had my eyes closed. So, but, you know, I knew that if I opened my eyes, I probably was going to panic, you know. So anyway, that's a very simple way to get me to do what you want, you know. But considering all the other ways, they actually say that if you're in the military, they say, don't try to fight it, you know. If they torture you, just tell them what they want, you know, because nobody is going to be able to fight it. Nobody is going to be able to resist that long, you know. I'm not positive this is true, but this is what I heard at one point. They say, just tell them, you know, because you're going to tell them eventually, and you might as well, you know, not go through all the torture and actual physical debilitation, you know. So, and you know, think about this as the way people will treat people, and of course, you know, you remember a few weeks ago there was a guy who waded into a child care center in England and just started chopping people up, you know. I mean, what? You know, how can we do this to one another? Okay, I'm beating on it too much. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is these are bestial entities. They're inhuman. And so this is the beast that rises out of the sea. Now, I said earlier that the sea is a sort of uncivilized part of humanity. Okay, we'll find that there is another beast that rises from the earth, which is a beast that rises from the civilized part of humanity. You see, so there is no choosing, right? Just because you're, you know, uncivilized, or in contemporary terms, that doesn't mean you're not going to be susceptible to the appeal of the dragon, okay? So anyway, we have this beast coming out of the sea, 10 horns and 7 heads. And so symbolically speaking, the 10 horns are kingdoms, the 7 heads. This is probably an image which reflects Rome because of the 7 hills again. Blasphemous names on the heads refers to the temples on the hills of Rome. Each one was to a god, such as Jupiter or Venus or, you know, Mercury, or you name the god. And again, the feet were like the beast was like a leopard. Why a leopard? Because leopards are ferocious. You know, leopards are they're worse than lions because they're more vicious than lions. Okay. And feet like a bear's, you know, so the idea of claws. Bears have, claws, right? Its mouth was like a lion's mouth, which basically meant it could, it would devour whatever it caught. So this is a beast that's all about predation, and prey, and eating, and killing, right? This is a deadly beast, okay? And the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority to the beast. So this is the way the dragon kind of incarnated himself. Remember I said that there's a holy trinity and then there's an unholy trinity, okay? And so and we see that right there. The dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority to this beast, this human entity, okay? And that's how he works. That's where he gets his power. He gets his power by incarnation into humanity, okay? And I won't say that the devil is totally powerless without a human incarnation. I won't say that for sure. I'm not positive that that's the case, but there does seem to be some indication that that is the case. Resist the devil and he'll flee from you. The devil goes around like a roaring lion seeking who he would destroy. Somebody said that when the lion's roaring, he's really just trying to scare you towards the other lions that are waiting in the bushes where you can't see them. So I don't know. I don't know if that's right or not. Anyway, the point is that there needs to be some human embodiment of the evil that the devil, that's the dragon embodies, okay? Actually doesn't embody. Okay, now, and again, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. So there's something goes wrong, and it seems like this beast is going to die or perish or something. But somehow he recovers, and everybody's amazed and says, and they worship the dragon and they worship the beast. And they say, who's like the beast and who can fight against it? Notice, they don't say who's like the dragon and who can fight against it. They say who's like the beast and who can fight against it. So the beast is an entity that on the earth that fights, okay? Is this making sense to everybody? Is this we're kind of seeing what's going on here? Now, people would want to say, well, what part of history is this or whatever? I mean, I have my own thoughts, but I think I've speculated enough for one night up till now. And but I do think that this kind of is an overlay on the trumpets that we saw back in the first part of, or the first half of the book, that the stuff that's going on here is similar to the stuff that, or this is another perspective on the stuff that was going on in the previous chapters, okay? It's sort of a heavenly perspective, if you want to, or a perspective from, a view from the perspective of powers, spiritual powers. Whereas before we were having a view from the perspective of nations and humans and so on. This is more of a power perspective, spiritual powers, okay? Because we don't look around and see dragons and we don't see beasts, right? We don't see these things. These are spiritual powers. But they have this human, like I say, human embodiment in governments and countries and militaries and so on and so forth, okay? All right. Can someone read this for us?
And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven.
Okay, so this beast, uh, has a mouth. He has a way to talk, to communicate. Now, obviously, this could be any particular form of media or whatever, but it's clearly intended to be something that is heard by a lot of people. Okay, and it utters haughty and blasphemous words. Do people know what blasphemy means? That's one thing I think. This is another one of these words that people will use. It would be nice if they just translated it. I think this is another word that's transliterated rather than being translated. Blasphemous means slander, okay? So to blaspheme is to slander. Whenever you see the word blasphemy, just think slander. Now, why would it be, why not just use the word slander? I don't really know. But when they use blasphemous words, these are words that are slanderous to God. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God. In other words, they're saying false things about God. Okay? Now, there are a lot of different ways they could do it. It could be saying there is no God, or saying that God is evil in one way or another, or even saying, even mischaracterizing God. Okay? False gods are blasphemous because they give a slanderous picture of God, like is Jupiter, right? Think of Jupiter. Now, those of you who know Greek mythology, Roman mythology, know that Zeus and Jupiter, they were not good people, right? I mean, they were not. Zeus would go and rape women, turn himself into a shower of gold so he could rape a girl, or his wife was always mad at him because he was always chasing after some other goddess, and so on and so forth. Who would does anybody believe, even the Greeks didn't believe that Zeus was, they would redefine Zeus if they wanted to actually have a god that was worthy of worship, okay? So the problem was that they kind of kept piling different versions of God onto their gods, and so the Romans did that with a vengeance. The Romans would say, okay, this god is actually Jupiter, this god is actually Venus, and so on and so forth. So they would just kind of combine all the gods into a group, a pantheon of composite gods. That way they could make everybody feel good, Oh, our God is really Jupiter, or our God is really, Venus or whatever. But this is blasphemy in the sense it's slandering God. Okay? And any false view of God is a slander, right? Is saying God is something he's not, okay? It's a lie about God. And so this is where, haughty and blasphemous words, uttering blasphemies against God, it's basically just saying things about God that aren't true. And doing so with an attitude of an intent to deceive, and a sense of scorn and arrogance, okay? And so blaspheming God and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. I'm not quite sure what that means. Anyway, obviously angels, right? One of the interesting things that I noticed was, I think in Jude it says that Michael, who is the angel that defends Israel, Michael would not even, curse the devil. Instead, Michael was trying to get the body of Moses, and the devil had it apparently, and he wouldn't curse the devil or say anything against him. He said, the Lord rebuke you. Like not I'm going to do it with my power, but the Lord rebuke you. So there is this kind of reticence on the part of, angels even against, trying to confront the devil. And I think that we're well to keep that in mind. Sometimes the popular view is that we can come to, like we can cast out demons or things like that, but we have to be careful that we know what we're doing, and maybe, definitely don't want to play around with that kind of stuff, and have a sense of what we're dealing with. Okay, but anyway, that's kind of the other way around. So I'm trying to remember the exact quote from Jude. It said something like he would not utter a blasphemous something against the devil, but said the Lord rebuke you. Anyway, so anyway, the main point here is that this beast is uttering blasphemies against God and against angels and so on who dwell in heaven. Okay? Whew. All right. We'll do this one more part here. And I do want to talk a little bit about verse 8, but can someone read this section for us? Who hasn't read yet?
Samuel hasn't read.
Somebody read.
Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain.
Okay, well, this sounds pretty bad. It was allowed to make war on the saints. Who are the saints? Not the football team in New Orleans. No, it's the saints are Christians, okay? It was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. Oh my gosh. Okay, so what's going on here? I thought God would lead us to victory in every case. Well, not necessarily an earthly victory, okay? And someone said that the church advances through the blood of its martyrs or the blood of its saints, and so it's allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. Implies that things look really bad for the church. The church is persecuted and killed. People are killed and people are driven underground and whatever. And so authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. So this beast is all-powerful. All who dwell on earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. Okay. Now, this implies that we're going to be in big trouble, right? At some point, the church will be in big trouble. There will be a very strong and seemingly all-powerful persecution, and the church will seem to have just totally almost disappeared. But remember that the church will never be totally overcome, all right? That's a promise we have. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about verse 8. It says, and I want to point out that I believe that verse 8 should be translated, and all who dwell upon the earth will worship it, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Now, why do I think that? Well, the thing is that this is the way the word order works. In other words, if you look at the original Greek, the phrases are put in this order. Not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Okay, now you can say, well, Greek doesn't care about word order. But it does sometimes. In other words, the Greeks can play around with like what's the verb, what's the noun, and they could put they can throw the words pretty much in any order, and you can figure out what's what by looking at the way the words are conjugated or declined or whatever, right? You can figure out what word goes, what adjective goes with what noun, and what adverb goes with what verb, and so on and so forth. What phrase goes with what other thing. But in this case, the word order is significant. In the Greek, the word order is as I've written below there. So the names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Now they take that from the foundation of the world and stick it, they move it, not written from the foundation or before the foundation of the world. They move the word, that phrase, to a different part of the verse. My take on that is that's illegitimate, okay? The reason they did it is because it makes more sense that way. It makes more sense to say everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain, right? Makes more sense. But it's doctrinally significant, okay? And so you ought to be very careful to make that change if you're translating, okay? In other words, you should leave it alone and let the interpreter make that judgment call. Okay, so and I'm saying, and all who dwell upon the earth will worship it, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. The Lamb is slain from the foundation of the world. The names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. You see how that's a big change in doctrine there, okay? Does that make sense what I'm saying? If you don't understand it, don't worry about it, but you can see that this makes a difference, all right? So what could it mean that the Lamb is slain from the foundation of the world? Okay? That's weird. That's pretty weird, right? Was Jesus slain from the foundation of the world? Well, there's a lot of ways to look at it. And I think the most straightforward way is simply to say that in creating the world and creating humanity, God was open to the possibility that humanity with free will would fall, okay? And that he intended, even in that case, to go after, to redeem humanity if it fell, all right? So the idea there was that in the act of creating, he was opening up the possibility that that Christ would have to die to redeem humanity. That's the most straightforward way to look at it, all right? I don't actually look at it that way. And this might be this is not a big deal, okay? I mean, it is, to some people it might be a big deal. This is not a big deal from my point of view, but I'm going to tell you what I think because I think it's interesting. Imagine that God is, the Trinity is in eternity, right? And the Trinity is in relationship, in joyful and satisfying relationship, right? And the Trinity, because God is self-sufficient and blessed and needs nothing to be who He is perfectly content, or I don't want to say content because in a way He wasn't content, but God wasn't content. But let's just say that He was satisfied in the sense of being who He was. But at some point He decided, the Trinity, the three persons of the Trinity decided, the more the merrier, to put it bluntly, okay? That the idea was to create more children, more spiritual beings that could participate in this kind of relationship. And he did it by making a physical creation and embodying, like it says in Genesis 2, he made the man out of the dust and breathed his spirit into him, and he became a living soul. So he made humanity to be a kind of an amphibious creature, half spiritual, half physical. Or a better way to put it is having a root in both spirit and material reality. And then on that basis, Adam and Eve could be fruitful and multiply and make a whole bunch of these spirit, physical beings, namely human beings. And that way God could have, you might say, more opportunity for fellowship with beings like himself. Remember, mankind was made in the image of God, right? And so we were intended to be peers of God. We were intended to be the glory of God, all right? Okay, now I want you to think about that. I want you to think of, and the analogy here, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's an analogy you could think about. Daniel and Ashley and Toby, okay? My son and daughter-in-law and grandson. Okay, three of them are perfectly happy, right? Toby is in heaven, he's just having a great old time and all that. All of a sudden, there's this new kid on the block, Gloria, right? And now Toby has got to make room for her, okay? He's got to kind of empty himself to a certain degree so that she could have space. He has to open up space for Gloria, if he were to get to be mad or to be jealous or whatever, it would be very unpleasant, right? In fact, a lot of times that happens. The new child comes along and the older child feels resentful and angry. How come I don't get all the attention anymore, you see? So and this is something that C.S. Lewis actually, I was telling Dan that I was going to mention C.S. Lewis. In his book Miracles, he talked about this. He said that it's possible that even the act of creation was a kind of death, because Christ, or the Son, was emptying himself to the point of making it possible for there to be other sons, other beings like himself that would share with the Father's love, you see. And so there doesn't have to be a sense of anger or pain, but there is a sense of emptying yourself to make room, and that's a kind of death, okay? All right, this is totally speculative. It's one way to make sense of this passage. It's probably the best way to make sense of it is just to read it in the very straightforward fashion that God anticipated that Christ would have to suffer from the very beginning. But I don't like that much. I think the other way is possible, okay? It's possible. And there are intimations that this is the case, because it talked about in Philippians, it talks about how he emptied himself and didn't cling to, how the Son emptied himself, not clinging to being God, but took the form of a servant and so on. So now you can say, well, that was in fact the crucifixion. But the idea of emptying yourself and making room for something else, when you're the Son of the Father, the only begotten Son of the Father, the only one and only Son. You see, now there's a whole, like it says in Romans 8, he's the firstborn among many sons or many children. Ask yourself, isn't there an emptying that has to take place for that to happen? Isn't that a kind of death? Well, something to think about. Wow. I hope that wasn't too confusing or frustrating for you. Are there any questions or thoughts or comments?
Are there, I think you went into a lot of detail explaining how, because the woman represents Israel, how historically it relates with World War One. I mean, World War One was a long time after, like, this was written, and this was, part of the canon for almost
Sure.
2 millennia. Are there other historical ways that people have tried to explain, like, chapter 12, because
Yeah,
I
sure.
see where you're going with all of the
Right,
Israel
right.
stuff, and I think,
Yeah.
of course, it makes sense because of Israel's kind of interesting formation in the 20th century. But
I think for me, that's decisive. In other words, that was through, for almost 2,000 years, Israel was wandering, like I say, wandering in the wilderness. They had no home. The phrase, you may have heard of the phrase wandering Jew, right? There's a plant called the wandering Jew, which I guess, anyway. But that was literally a cliche, a wandering Jew, because the Jews had no home. And they could be kicked out of, at a moment's notice, right? They were. And in fact, one of the fascinating things in Europe was that that the Jews were not allowed to own property, that is, farms and so on and so forth. So they had to be merchants and money lenders. So kings would borrow money from Jews, and then they'd kick them out of the country, and then they wouldn't have to. That's an easy way to finance the national debt, right? Is just kick them out of the country. Unfortunately, well, anyway. So ours is a little bit too big for something like that. But anyway, you see my point, right? That there was something different starting at World War I when the mandate for the Jewish homeland was made, and then finally after World War II, it became a reality. And it was rather improbable that this would even happen, right? So
it just makes me curious how the church would understand
this
chapter prior
well,
to that.
It's interesting because people were saying they used to have end times conferences, or what was it? Was it end times or eschatology? Anyway, yeah, I say end times conferences before, in the the 1800s or whatever. And I remember reading how in one of them they said the next major event in salvation history is the restoration of Israel. And this was, in the 1800s or early 1900s, somewhere in that time frame,
So they, instead of pointing to a historical event the way we can, they were reading it as kind of forward.
As prophecy, yeah. So, what can you say, right? You could say, well, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't know. But it still got fulfilled, and there were a lot of people who did not want it to be fulfilled, certainly, right? And the circumstances under which it is fulfilled, certainly if Israel could have chosen, they probably wouldn't have chosen that way of doing it, right? But and it's an amazing example in my mind of redemption, where God takes something horribly evil and uses it to leverage his, not that God wanted it to happen by any means, or even caused it to happen, but he leveraged that evil event to accomplish his purposes. And this is the way God works, okay? God works to take evil and, in essence, recreate it so that it accomplishes his purposes. All right? Yeah. Any other comments or complaints or...
I found it interesting, verse 5 makes mention of 42 months.
Yeah.
It's kind of another possible reference to 3.5 years.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. This again, the idea of the tribulation taking 7 years, that there will be a time of peace for the first 3.5 years of this tribulation, where all the players kind of come to power, and then the last 3.5 years are like, it hits the fan, and the world is not a livable place. Yeah, so it's
I didn't miss it when you were talking about it, but I think that's how I was taught to interpret
right,
the
right,
10 times and half the time.
right, right.
Half would be a year, times would be 2 and half, which is how they would come up with the 42 months.
Yeah, you notice that there are a number of different ways they put it. 1200 and where did it go? 1260 or 1260 times and half a time, and then 42 months. And it's all the same amount of time. Why does he do it like that? I don't know. I think if I thought about it, I maybe could figure it out, but we're going to do some interesting stuff with numbers in a little bit, but not this week. Just, actually, I should probably have done that one. Oh, well. I should do this last one here, just real
just do it.
quick.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, can someone read this, and we'll end on this note? Sorry, I didn't mean to build up your hopes and then crash them, dash them.
9 and 10. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword must he be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints.
Okay, so here you see he's allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And this is simply saying that what will happen, God is not going to do anything to stop it. Okay? God is going to let it happen. This is judgment. Judgment is when God takes his hand off the situation and lets evil have its way. Okay? Now you might say, does he ever do that? Well, it certainly sounds like that's what's going on here. Why would he do such a thing? Because, you see, the idea is that there are many people who will follow the beast. All who dwell on the earth will worship it, right? People will be so impressed by its power and by its ability to, what was it? Who is like the beast and who can fight against it, right? People are caught up by the power and the ability of the beast to just do whatever it wants to do. They don't care about whether what it's doing is right, you see. They just follow it. It's the biggest kid on the block. It's the one that can conquer. And so people say, yeah, let's follow the beast, And that is judgment, right? It's judgment because you are the one who decides what you're going to do here, right? And you see that it's two kinds of judgment. First of all, it's judgment because it's a terrible situation, right? This thing that's happening makes the world a horrible place. But it's also a kind of judgment in the sense that it sorts you out. Are you going to follow the beast or are you going to resist the beast to the point of even dying, you see? So this kind of judgment is extreme. We don't really want to have to go through that judgment. So, yeah, we should really try hard to... this is a tribulation, and anyway, it would be nice if we didn't have to do this. But it says, here is a call for the endurance and the faith of the saints. Okay? So that means we should know when this stuff is happening. We should know. We should simply say, look, it's right there. It was predicted. It's going to happen. And we've already seen kind of, one of the things we see throughout the Revelation is foreshadowings, right? I mean, throughout history, we've seen foreshadowings when there's been persecution of Christians, right? I mean, pretty extreme at times, right? And so this is like the intensification. There is no stopping it, okay? And so we have to endure and believe. Trust God. Okay. Okay, we can stop there. Any more questions or thoughts? That bad, huh? Sorry. Do you guys find it useful for me to give some of my speculations like I did? Find it interesting, or else do you find it just totally confusing?
It's good.
Huh? Both.
Because I have no clue what it is. So at least you give us a clue.
Okay.
And it's helpful that you say, this is something that there's some amount of speculation on this.
Yeah. Okay.
And also when there can be differing interpretations, it's useful to know that there are competing interpretations for
Right,
passage.
right. Well, I try to be as honest as I can, though I admit there are some I just would rather not talk about. But yeah.
When we were thinking about this study before we started, we had mentioned that I think what Darson said, I would agree with that, because
Okay.
some of this stuff is so confusing that having a perspective, even if there's some speculative, pieces to it, is better than having no clue for sure. So.
Good. Okay. Well, if it gets too bewildering, just let me know. I don't know what I'll do about it, but
It's really interesting to hear how some of these things have themes coming from the Old Testament and where those are coming from.
Great. Okay, let's pray. God, I just pray that as we look at your word, and especially this part of it, we would be encouraged. We would be encouraged to know that regardless of how crazy and how horrific things get, they never escape you, and that you're capable of taking the worst evil and redeeming it for your purposes. And so I pray that as we go through some of these things, we could endure and trust you in the midst of it all. And partly simply because we have heard your word in this area. So we thank you that you gave it to us and that you are walking with us through this, through the things that we have to go through. We pray in Jesus' name, amen.